Hello, listeners. It's me, your host, Candace Carnahan, and I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to Sharing Stories Changing Lives, a space where conversations are real, raw, and rooted in purpose. Now, let me tell you about today's guest, someone whose voice stopped me in my tracks, almost literally. I first heard Sandra Larose on CBC's The Current while I was on my way to a yoga class, and I'll admit it, I usually these days switch the station over if I don't hear music right away. But that day was different. I just caught a few seconds of Sandra speaking, and something in her voice made me pause. I didn't change the channel, and when I arrived at yoga, I actually sat in my car, parked there, and just kept listening. I didn't get to hear all of Sandra's story, and so I went home and I listened again because Sandra's story really hit home for me. And not just because her life changed in a moment of distraction like mine did, but because her message is rooted in personal accountability, a powerful advocacy, and a desire to prevent others from experiencing unimaginable loss. In Canada, distracted driving has now surpassed impaired driving as the leading cause of traffic collisions, including fatal ones. Reading or sending a text message, get this, takes about 5 seconds. And at 90 kilometers an hour, and let's be honest, most of us are driving faster than that, that's the length of driving an entire football field with your eyes closed. I've said it for years and I'll say it again. There is nothing that you need to say, there is nothing anybody needs to say to you that is worth a life. And as Sandra so powerfully says, there is no redo button. Sandra's life changed forever on August 22nd, 2018. That day fueled her mission, her voice, and her deep commitment to change, and I am honored to have her on our podcast today. Sandra, thank you for being here with us today on Sharing Stories, Changing Lives.
Thank you for having me, Candace.
I want to just jump right into it because I believe in the why behind the what.
You know, my why will always be Kaylin. She drives me. When we were taking her off of life support, when they told us that she would not have a good quality of life if we kept on with medical treatment, I made her one promise, and that was to make her proud.
So you made that promise with Kaylin when she was still with us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I intend to keep that promise. And, you know, it seems so almost minimal when you think of how often we tell our kids that we're proud of them, or we tell our spouses or our partners or our friends that we're proud of them. There's not that, like, it doesn't seem to have that deep-seated impact that when you see your child laying in a hospital bed on a ventilator and there's nothing that you can do. I couldn't save her. So all I can do now is hopefully save others.
In your interview that I listened to and in your work, you talk about habits, how distracted driving, whether it be the texting or looking at the phone or having a conversation, whatever the case might be, you talk about habits. How much of it do you think is habit? And also, how much of it do you think is that invincibility factor? That young people or people in general just think, it's not going to happen to me. I can hear it on the news. I can listen to that story. But hey, you know, I've got this.
Oh, absolutely. It's. I think everybody has that sort of sense of invincibility that it won't happen to them. That's human nature. You know,
right.
Nobody walks through life tippy-toeing on eggshells, never hurting themselves, never getting a cut, never getting a bruise. But this is a big bruise. And talking about the habits, it's part habit, part addiction even. Yeah. And if you actually are conscious of and aware of what you are doing, which a lot of us, when you have a long drive, I commute an hour every day back and forth. And when you're in that hour-long drive, you're almost mesmerized. You don't There's times where I've been driving where all of a sudden I'm at my turn to turn into my farm, and how did I get here?
Well, you're also for the listeners, you're also in Saskatchewan, which you could drive for a week and not
Right.
see a tree or a
Yes,
hill or a
exactly.
marker.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
there's not a lot of visual stimulation out here.
No.
But like that, the habit part of it, it's it's you hear that ding, or you hear the vibration if you have it on just vibrate, and your instinct is to pick up that phone. I still do it, not driving, but even at home. I'll be cooking supper, my phone's on the table, I hear a ding, and I'll stop what I'm doing and I'll go look at my phone. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we didn't have that. So like our interruption would be the phone on the wall ringing. Or
Well, and you knew better to not call it dinner time.
Right, exactly.
Back in the day, we knew to not
Yeah.
phone someone because it's dinner time.
Yeah.
Whereas now we're fighting against not only human nature,
Right.
but this expectation that the car is a great
Yeah.
place to have a meeting. That people should be accessible and available and in touch at all times.
Exactly. And it's you think back in 40 years ago, 50 years ago, where times were simpler.
Yeah.
It comparable to where we are right now, most people would say that cell phones simplify life because you don't have to wait for that call, you don't have to wait for that email, you don't have to wait for anything. It's all in the palm of your hand. But what has made I don't think that makes life simple. It makes life maybe easy.
There's a difference.
But there is a difference. And if things were simple, we wouldn't have to be so attached. And
That's a great point.
if we could just put the phone down and pay attention to our time, because time is precious nowadays. Everything is so fast moving. You have to get to this meeting. You have to get here. Everybody speeds. You can speed all you want, but you're not going to get there any faster. You might get to the red light before me, but you're not actually going to get to your destination faster.
Oh, I know. I say that all the time. And then you just get to the stop sign, and then you're the big moron that was passing everyone on the way, right? And no one is ever going to remember if you were late. No one is ever going to forget, all too well. And I would like to talk a little bit about that. If you don't ever make it at all, if you don't arrive.
Yep.
And I know that your daughter was on her way to visit a friend when one instant, one choice changed everything. Can you tell us a little bit about that day? I know it can't be easy.
Yeah, so that morning, we woke up like every other morning. Kaylin was actually going to drive into work with me because we had our same shifts that day, different employers, but same shift. Then she decided at the last minute that she was going to drive her car in. Looking back now, I'm sure that she decided to take her car because she wanted to go and see her friend. So we both got off our jobs, and she called as I was driving home, and coincidentally, I answered my phone. She wanted to just go visit friends quick. She wasn't going to be long. Of course, I argued with her a little bit. I wanted her to come home and help with chores in the garden and everything. But of course, being the mom that I was, I caved again. So I went home and I was feeding the goats and the sheep, and you'd lose track of time. And I got in the house and realized how late it was. And thought, that's odd. She should be here by now. So I texted her the typical, where the heck are you? And put my phone down, and it dinged right away. I assumed it was Kaylin messaging me back, but it was a Facebook Messenger message from her friend. And he asked me to call this phone number, and it was a Weyburn area phone number. So I called, and it was the RCMP. And all they said to me is, Kaylin's been in an accident. Stars Air Ambulance is airlifting her to Regina. They're going to land in 12 minutes. Do you need a ride? My husband was out baling hay, And so I called him in from the field, and we just jumped in the car and went. I didn't know. I knew it was bad because she was in a helicopter. They don't
Right.
airlift you if you have a minor injury. So we got to the hospital. It takes us an hour to get to the city, approximately. I'm pretty sure it didn't take us an hour that day. And we were met at the hospital emergency room doors by the flight nurse from STARS and the social worker. So they took us back to the family room, and they explained that Kaylin was already in an induced coma, just for her safety, and that she was going to go up for surgery to relieve pressure on her brain. And that after she had stabilized following surgery, that they were going to fly us up to Saskatoon, because Saskatoon is where they had the pediatric intensive care unit. Kaylin was 16 at the time of her accident. That was on August 16th of 2018. So after I got to see her before she went into surgery, and she didn't have a mark on her.
Oh,
At that point now, I've learned that she was hit by a train, because I learned that on my way to Regina as I, tried to find Kaylin's friend's number to phone him. He told me on the phone that her car had been hit by a train. So I, like, moving back to when we were driving into the city, and you hear that like a train. I literally looked at my husband, and I'm pretty sure I was every shade of white. And I just said to him, I said, she got hit by a train. And I just had this knot in my stomach, because all I could think about is, how do you survive getting hit by a train? And what is she going to look like? You're thinking that, like, you're preparing yourself to what you're going to see when you get to that hospital. And they took us into the room. There was myself and my husband and Kaylin's dad and my parents. And I walked in there, and I was like, your makeup is still on, your eyelashes are still on, your eyebrows are still perfect. Like, she didn't have a mark on her. And I said, how is this possible?
yeah.
And, so fast forward, we were up in Saskatoon for 6 days. And they told us on August 21st at 2:00 in the afternoon, which is Kaylin's 17th birthday, that if she pulled through, she would likely have no quality of life. And I know my daughter, I could have selfishly just kept fighting and kept hoping and praying and everything else. But I knew in my heart that she wouldn't have wanted that.
What a decision as a parent. I'm not a parent, but I can't even imagine what it must have been like for you and your husband to have to make that choice.
Yeah, it was surreal.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, like, if we could backtrack to the beginning of 2018 when the Humboldt Broncos crash
Mm-hmm.
happened. At that point in time, I remember thinking, when that happened, I can't even imagine. Like, I remember where I was the day that it hit the radio, and the time it was when I heard it. And Kaylin followed the story closely. She, at that point in time, after hearing about Logan Boulet, she decided to become an organ donor. Back then, we didn't have a registry in Saskatchewan, so we had the little red stickers that we put on our health cards. So she came home and she found the stickers and put them on all of our health cards and said, you guys are all being organ donors.
Wow.
But she said, I want to be an organ donor. And of course you do the, yeah, whatever, but yeah, I get it. If something ever happens, I know, but she was smart enough at 16 that she had to tell us, because, all in all, the family has the last say. And, like, fast forward a few months, and her dad and I are signing consent forms.
Wow, surreal doesn't even begin to sum it up. And I want the listeners to understand as well that your daughter was not texting.
No.
She simply, was
Yeah,
looking
Kaylin.
down at her screen, and
Yeah,
this
yeah.
because someone shared
She
it with you.
Yes, I received the police report. So I asked for Kaylin's phone back from the police prior to her celebration of life. And when the officer came out to our farm, he was able to tell me unofficially at that time that because of the collision was distracted driving. So when I received the police report, which of course takes months to receive, when I was reading it, um, first of all, it stated that the cause was distracted driving and driver inexperience. Kaylin hadn't even had her license for a year. And it also stated that the train crew, from their vantage point in the engine, could see her looking down at the passenger seat of her car.
Mm-hmm.
Kaylin drove a standard. So she would have been turning off of the highway, left off of the highway. So she would have been shifting gears. And as an inexperienced driver, even though she had experience driving out at the farm since she was 12 years old, but as an inexperienced, like I would presume you're not going to be able to hold your phone and shift gears and hold the steering wheel and turn off of the highway at highway speeds at the same time.
One wouldn't think. I can't drive a
So,
standard, but
no. So her phone was presumably on. Google Maps was activated on her phone. So
yeah.
she had never been out to that farm that I had known, that I knew of. Her friend was actually house sitting out there. So she had never been out there, and it was like a back road, uncontrolled. There was only the crossbuck sign. It was right at the rail yard, right at the grain terminal. So it's it's not a the crossing that she crossed
Yeah.
would have been basically used by either truckers or the families that live along that road.
You say Google Maps, right?
Yes.
It's such a fine line, right? That with this whole, like you say, the difference between simple and easy, convenient, and we have these mechanisms and apps and all the things to help us be safer, right? But at the same time, it also causes us to be a little bit lackadaisical, if that would be the word.
does.
Like, we think, oh, it's
Yeah.
on the phone, I'm not looking at a map, that's safer, or my hands aren't touching it, right?
Right.
But if you're in a deep conversation even with somebody on your hands-free phone, you are not paying attention to what you say it. We don't multitask. We can
Nope.
switch tasks, but we can't truly multitask. And the
No.
only way of ensuring that this doesn't happen and doing everything you possibly can is to truly focus on one thing, and that is operating your vehicle and looking at the road.
Yeah.
Have you seen what in the past 7 years, 6 years of doing this work, what are you seeing? What are you hearing after you share Kaylin's story? What is driving you to continue to give you hope? And also, a bigger question, what are you seeing that continues to be an issue, and why do you think people aren't getting it? Sorry, I just went at you with like 5 questions at
No,
once,
that's
but
okay.
I
That's okay. When I present, and I do present primarily to teens,
Yes.
to high school students, and it's my presentation. I've presented to grade 5 as the lowest grade, up to grade 12, and I like speaking. Just to sidetrack here, I like speaking to those younger students, the ones that are far enough away from even getting their learner's license, because they're the ones that are probably sassy enough, for lack of better words, to call their parents out.
100%. If we want to change cultures, we
Yeah.
have to get to the youth, because they are the ones that
Absolutely.
drive the change.
Absolutely.
When we're also set in our ways as we get older, right?
Right. This year, I started thinking, as I was doing presentations, 7 years ago or 8 years ago, if Kaylin had seen a presentation like this, maybe my life would be different.
So you can allow yourself to actually think that. That's interesting to me, because sometimes people say, well, if someone had given you that presentation in school, do you think about workplace health and safety? Do you think things would have been different? And I have such an inability to think about anything other than the way it is. I don't know if it's because it's too painful. I'm not sure why, but I can't go there.
That drives me even more. Like, my goal is to speak to every high school student in every high school in Canada.
I commend you for that. And I mean, I started my career speaking in high schools, and so much of what I do is corporate now, but I'm so proud to be back in the schools. I've created a little program with regard to, I shouldn't say little program, but it's talking about accountability, responsibility, bullying, standing up for what's right, saying to your friend if they're behind the wheel and driving, hey, it's not okay. If you see something, you have to say something. Right?
Exactly. I say in my presentation that if Kaylin had lived, she would be standing up there sharing her story, because I know her.
Yeah.
And I know the one thing, because she was a very strong proponent of empathy and compassion and influence.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that she would say, and I didn't initially have this in my presentation, the one thing that she would say is that as youth, they have more power than they realize. And that power is influence. And they can influence changes. I look at the difference between, I'm 51. So I think of back in the day in high school, which wasn't me because I decided to become a mother at 17, but of my friends partying in high school and drinking and driving and this and that. And when I think of Kaylin, when she was in high school, she was a good kid, but she still went to parties. She was a normal kid. They didn't drink and drive.
What I find interesting in this day and age, and it's something, again, that you spoke to, is if we were at a four-way stop sign and you saw someone haul up a Sailor Jerry's or a Captain Morgan's at the stop sign and take a big swig, how long would it take you to call the police? Not long. Absolutely. But when we see someone watching the World Cup on their mounted thing or looking down because they think it's okay because we're at a stop sign, it's not okay, PS listeners, still illegal. Rules are rules for reasons. We don't say anything, or at least the majority of us don't, because the stigma isn't connected to the phone the way it is to alcohol. And what you said that I want to share with our listeners is the problem is not that a phone is more dangerous than alcohol, is that everybody has a phone.
Absolutely.
Not everybody has a pint of rum or a beer in their car, thank goodness. Right?
Yep, exactly.
But it's just a replacement. It's another problem. It's another
They're
distraction.
Equally dangerous.
They're equally dangerous. More people have a cell phone. Almost everyone does. A passenger, driver, you name it.
And when cell phones started becoming the norm, we didn't have these laws because it was new.
Mm-hmm.
There was no past instances of deaths and collisions and all of that to go. Everybody has known for years that you don't drink and drive. But, after, back in Prohibition, I'm sure there weren't drinking and driving laws.
Exactly. We've been evolving this.
These laws are the laws are there for a reason.
Exactly.
They keep you and everybody around you safe. I personally, I'm very, I was born and raised in Regina. I married a farmer. But even now, if we come into the city on let's say Friday, Saturday, typically, if that would be it, I do not like driving home after midnight. Now that Kaylin has died due to distracted driving, it's you don't want to drive any hour.
Period. Yeah.
And I've done ride-alongs with the police here in Regina, and I can pick out a person on their phone. And I have called 911 on the highway when I see somebody severely swerving in and out. And I will say, I don't know if they're drunk or if they're on their phone.
Either or.
So, but we have a program here in Saskatchewan, and it's called RID, and it's Report Impaired Drivers. But impaired is a very broad term, because
absolutely,
to me, if you're on your phone,
you're impaired.
100%.
What do you do to change this? How do you become more in tune with the risks you're taking? Kaylin's story, I believe, will resonate with everyone who's heard it. And I believe She is so proud of you and the work that you're doing, and that it is saving lives. For the person listening today who wakes up in the morning and is getting ready to leave their house, what do we want to remind them to keep in mind?
The biggest thing around distracted driving and cell phone use specifically is awareness. Be aware of what you're doing. You have to be aware of your surroundings. Everybody knows that. Like you said in the beginning, when you look down for 10 seconds, you are driving the full length, 5 seconds. You're driving the full length of that football field with your eyes closed. Now, when you wake up in the morning and you leave and you get in your car to go to work, to school, or wherever, that's a risk. Everybody is at risk. If you're behind the wheel and you own a phone, nobody is not at risk. And not only do you have to be aware of what you are doing within your vehicle, you have to be aware of the hundreds of other vehicles that you're going to pass every day. And if you look down for that split second and somebody runs a red light or a stop sign,
you're not going to see it.
Back in 2019 here in Saskatchewan, I did the voiceover for the SGI commercial. So SGI is our government insurance. And we did the launch in Saskatchewan. So after the launch, we had all of the TV stations, the big cameras, police cars, marked police cars everywhere on the corner of one of the busiest corners in downtown Saskatoon. And in a 20-minute period, they gave out 37 distracted driving tickets because people would stop at the red light. You see video cameras, you see reporters, you see mills of people all around. Police cars are in the parking lot. They gave out 37 tickets in 20 minutes.
I want to close off here and ask you a question that I ask every guest, because I do like to leave things in a as inspirational as I possibly can. I think probably it's my style, but I think it makes everyone just feel a little bit better. And I want to ask you what I call it your half-price pedicure. So for me, I look at what's one of the positive things that have come out of the fact that I am down a foot, and it is that I save some money on my pedicures. And so I just wondered if you had an answer to kind of leave us with that. One of the positives that you see shining through from all of the heartache and tragedy preventable that you went through?
I think for myself, obviously there's a lot of negatives, but the positives for me are what I myself see in myself.
Okay.
And what the impact that I can make. And if I could do this behind a screen and nobody could see me and they could just hear my voice, I would do it. I never wanted to be the face of rail safety.
Nobody wants that job.
No. But if anything, it would be the power within.
The power within. I love that. That's a fantastic note to leave it on. I want to thank you for being our guest, and I want to let the listeners know that Sandra does share Kaylin's story, as she mentioned, not only with students but with adults, with corporations. There is something in Sandra's story for everyone to take away from. Sandra Larose .ca is where you can get in touch with our brave, courageous, and life-changing guest that I am so honored to have had you on the show with us here today. Thank you for listening to Sharing Stories Changing Lives. Please tune in wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're interested in finding out where I'm sharing my story next, visit me at www.candacecarnahan.com.